do your will. And we ask these things in Jesus' holy name. Amen. This morning's scripture reading will come from John 13, 34 through 35. John 13, 34 and 35. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another.
I'm glad to see each of you here today. Take your Bibles to Romans chapter 13, please. Romans chapter 13. I don't know if you picked up on the theme that Forrest's songs had with it, the idea of love. And we started this series of one another last Sunday morning. There's so much that's said in regard to that phrase that we're going to study. But one thing that Reggie said in his prayer that I appreciate is kind of included in this discussion of one another. See, with one another, that includes me. And if you're talking about one another, that includes you. It's often the case that we want to look at others and maybe think about what they could do better or do more and do less of and things like this. And it's often hard to self-reflect, to think about what I need to do differently. When we're talking about one another, it means, yes, you, but it also means me. That's the idea that we're going to be talking about. And so I appreciate Forrest leading those songs, help us get our minds where they need to be. Just a couple of things that I said last week in connection with this series of lessons. God has never intended for the church or her members, individual members, to be reclusive. And that word reclusive means avoiding the company of other people, to be solitary. God has never intended that to be the case for His people. We looked last week at John chapter 17, verses 20 through 23, that Jesus was praying for me and you. He was in the presence of His disciples in the first century, but He was praying for those who would believe on Him through their words. Well, that's me and you, that they may be one in us. And the reason that that is stated is that our unity, our one anotherness, if you will, is so that the world may believe. If we are fighting amongst ourselves, if we are not who we need to be as a united body of believers here in this particular location, then how in the world do you think we'll be able to convince others to come to Christ? If they know that we're at each other, they're not going to want any part of that. And so Jesus talks about that there in John chapter 17. One another, we talked about this last week, is a reciprocal pronoun. It expresses a mutual relationship. In other words, again, it's not just me looking at everybody else and what everybody else can do. It's me looking at myself and seeing maybe I need to change some things, do something a little different. A quote that I found in regard to reciprocal pronouns is that they refer to situations where someone performs an action on others and receives the same action in return. And so that's pretty straightforward. It's not me looking at everybody else and what they can do for me. It's not you looking at everybody else and what they can do for you. It's we reciprocate. We treat one another properly because this is what God would have us to do. So there is this, what I call the umbrella commandment. And this, we're going to deal with this today, and you'll understand what I mean by that here in just a second. But all of these one another passages that I shared with you last Sunday on the screen fall under one umbrella, if you will. And that is, I think I told you to turn to Romans chapter 13. Look at Romans chapter 13, beginning in verse 8. Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. For this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet, and if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Love worketh no ill toward his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. When I say the umbrella commandment, that's what I'm talking about. Now, some people struggle with verse 9 here, and they're like, well, that's the Ten Commandments. Are we supposed to follow the Ten Commandments? Well, no, we're not under the jurisdiction of the law of Moses today. But all of these commandments that are listed here are there. But they were wrong before the Ten Commandments were ever given, weren't they? It was wrong before Sinai to commit adultery. It was wrong before Sinai to kill. to steal, and it's still wrong under the Christian dispensation too. So don't let little things like that throw you off. You know, Jesus taught these same things. Paul taught these same things. He's not talking about Christians living under the Ten Commandments. What he's saying, the point he's saying is that a person who claims to be a member of the body of Christ will not mistreat his brother or his sister. Verse 10, it will not work ill towards his neighbor, and so love is a fulfillment of the law. Turn over a couple of pages to Galatians chapter 5 with me, and let's look at it here. Galatians chapter 5, beginning in verse 13. For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty, only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. So you understand why I call this the umbrella commandment. Anything that you can think of in regard to my responsibility as a Christian falls under the umbrella of love one another or love God. So if you want to talk about the Ten Commandments, go back to Exodus chapter 20. And the first, 4 of the Ten Commandments are all in relation to God, man's relation to God, and the last 6 are all man's relation to man. And the whole law, Paul says now twice, is summed up in this one word. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's the umbrella commandment. The word love is used as a verb and as a noun in the New Testament. Surely you've heard this word. People talk about agape love. You've heard that term. It has a verb form and it has a noun form. This is not necessarily an emotional, like familial, family-type love. That would be a different word altogether. Paul uses that in Romans chapter 12 and verse 10. He says, by honor prefer one another in brotherly love. That's that Philadelphia that we hear sometimes, that brotherly love. When we're talking about this type of love, this is the love that says, God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. This is a word that means one individual has the best interest of other individuals in mind. This is a benevolent mindset, one who will do goodwill towards others, one who will do what's best for others, have a preference for, as you see, to regard the welfare of others. So think about it like that. For God so regarded our welfare that He sent His only begotten Son. That's the idea behind that word. We couldn't save ourselves, and so out of His love for us and His wanting us to be saved, He did something. Well, affection can be involved in that, benevolence, goodwill, again. And remember, so look at that phrase there in that noun, goodwill. You think back to Romans chapter 13, verse 10. Love worketh no ill towards his neighbor. If I'm a Christian, if I'm a member of the body of Christ, then I will be one who has a good will towards my fellow brothers and sisters, and I'll do whatever I can to maintain that. But here's the question. Okay, so how would anybody know? I mean, we can verbalize that all day long. We want this, I want that, I want this type of relationship. I love you, you love me. Okay, yeah, well, anybody can say that. So what? So what I've done here for the next couple of slides, I don't typically do this, but it'll be a whole lot easier than turning to every single one. I just want to lay out for you the case from multiple New Testament writers of this idea of having this goodwill, this affection, this benevolent spirit towards one another. Of course, we have the scripture reading that Dalton read to us. A new commandment give I unto you, that you love one another. As I have loved you, so love you one another. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. I mean, how many times can he say it in just a couple of phrases? Well, you continue flipping through the book of John. John chapter 15, verses 12 and 17. This is my commandment, that you love one another, as I have loved you. These things I command, that ye love one another. You will notice, you see this, there's one word that keeps popping up here, command. Okay? I don't get to shut this off. I don't get to determine this. Now, I would say it's loving others and some of the things that we're going to talk about in this one another series. Forbearing with one another, being patient with one another, long-suffering with one another. That's stuff we have to work on. If you've dealt with humans to any extent in your life, you know there are some people you just have to bear with. But you do that because you love them. Because why? Well, because love is the umbrella commandment. And everything that I do with and to other people is because I'm under that umbrella of the commandment. This word that keeps popping up is commandment. Notice that as we go throughout these passages. Romans 12:10, be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love. Romans 13:8, owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another has fulfilled the law. And the Lord make you to increase and abound in love one toward another and toward all men. Notice that. This isn't just Christian to Christian. This is Christian to non-believer. You abound in love one to another and toward all men. I think a danger, kind of a pitfall that we can fall into as Christians is, again, that mindset of isolation. I don't want to be around those people of the world. They're just, man, they're so bad. They're so wicked and sinful. I don't need that type of person in my life. Well, if that's the mentality you're going to take, number one, you're in violation of 1 Timothy 3:12. Number two, you're probably not going to reach out to them with the gospel. If your mindset is, I don't want anything to do with them. Now, that's not saying that we don't draw lines and that we don't make good judgments in terms of the company we keep. But if we just shut the world out because the world's so terrible, well, they're going to have to answer for that. But you know what? I'll have to answer for that too. But as touching brotherly love, ye need not that I write to you, for ye yourselves are taught of God. Look at that. This is not... So go back to John chapter 13. This is a commandment. You are taught of God. This is not manufactured, though. This is not... And Peter's... We're going to look at 1 Peter here in just a minute. So it's a commandment. You're taught by God to love one another, but it's real. So keep that in mind. You yourselves are taught of God to love one another. Well, how did God teach us about that? Well, take your Bibles to Romans chapter 5. I don't have this up here, but let's think about that for just a minute. Obviously, God teaches us to love one another through the written word, but wouldn't you also say that through His action, through what He did, God taught us to love one another? We're actually going to look at two verses. Romans 5 first. Verse 6, for when we were yet without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. For scarcely for a righteous man would one die, and yet peradventure for a good man some would even dare to die. But God, the King James says, commendeth. I'm not sure about the New King James here, but the word I prefer is manifests. He made it abundantly clear. God has demonstrated, He's shown forth His love toward us. And that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So when we read that phrase in 1 Thessalonians 4:9, ye yourselves are taught of God, He not only taught us in the written word and commands us, but He taught us by what He did, which tells me that love is more than just a verbalization. It's more than saying, I love you. It's got to have something to it. All right, turn over to 1 John chapter 4 real quick. 1 John chapter 4. I'm sorry, 1 John chapter 3. And we'll start in verse 14. 1 John 3:14, notice. We know that we have passed from death unto life because we love the brethren. He that loveth not his brother abideth in death. So it's a commandment. You're taught of God by the word, but also by what God did. And it's evident. Whosoever hateth his brother is a murderer, and ye know that no murderer hath eternal life abiding in him. You can't go to heaven and not have a right relationship with your brother, period. Hereby perceive we the love of God, because He laid... And there it is again. He taught us, He's given us a commandment, but notice, hereby we perceive. How are you able to recognize the love of God? Because He laid down His life for us. And we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoso hath this world... So here's what it means to lay down your life for your brethren. Whoso hath this world's goods, and seeth his brother have need, and he shuts up his compassion. You will notice here, if you're looking at a King James, the of compassion, the bowels of compassion. From your inner being, you're going to do whatever you need to do. But if you shut that up, if you cut yourself off, how does the love of God dwell in him? That verse asks a question that answers itself. If you claim to be a Christian and you don't love your brother, and you shut yourself off from Him, how does the love of God dwell in you? The answer to that is, it doesn't. Period. My little children, and this is what I've been saying. It's not just a verbalization. My little children, let us not love in word and in tongue. It's not just what you say, but in deed and in truth. So, back to our screen here, 1 Thessalonians 4:9. I don't need to write to you. You know this. You have been taught by God to love one another by what God did and by what God wrote. So let's continue here. And so this is the verse I was talking about in 1 Peter just a minute ago. Here it is. That love, biblical love, the commandment that we have, the things that are taught of God to love one another, is not manufactured. Listen to this. Seeing ye have purified your souls in obedience to the truth through the Spirit unto unfeigned love of the brethren. Unfeigned love of the brethren. That word unfeigned, unhypocritical. It's not a put on. It's not a play. It's not just something you say you come to the church building and you say something and you say it because, well, you want to get by this person and go sit down. I just say it. You obey the Spirit. Your souls have been purified. You obey the truth through the Spirit. And it leads to unfeigned love of the brethren. See that you love one another with a pure heart fervently. It's not manufactured. We love one another. We care for one another. I think of like 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 25, that we are one body, there should be no schism, and every member should have the same care one for another. 1 Peter 3:8, finally, be ye all of one mind, having compassion one of another. Love as brethren, be pitiful, be courteous. And then 1 John 3:11, for this is the message that ye have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. I mean, there are more verses than this that say this, but you've got Jesus saying it, you've got Paul, you've got Peter, and now we have John, the apostle. This is not, well, this is a take it or leave it. You do this or you are not what you claim to be. That's how serious this is. But again, this is what we call the umbrella commandment. 1 John 3:23, this is the commandment that we should, and notice here what it goes right with what I was just saying. This is the commandment, okay, that we should believe on the name of His Son, Jesus Christ. All right, if you're going to claim to be a Christian, you need to believe. Look at the phrase there. His Son, okay, Jesus is God's Son, and He's Christ. All right, He's the chosen one. That's what Christ means. He's the anointed. But then there's this little three-letter word, and. Okay, you have to hold the right beliefs. And it's a conjunction that brings two thoughts together. Love one another. It's not enough just to believe the right things. You can believe the right things all day long and still go to hell. You need to believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and love one another. Notice, as He gave us what? As He gave us an option. As He gave us to do whenever we feel like it or not? No. As He gave us a commandment. 1 John 4:7, beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who is born of God, and everyone that loveth is born of God, and knoweth God. Something to think about. Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. No man hath seen God at any time. If we love one another, okay, so we've never seen God, but if we have a proper relationship with one another, a proper goodwill, a proper affection, think of all those definitions, proper actions towards one another, well, guess what? God dwelleth in us, and His love is perfected in us. God dwelling in us is not some literal bodily presence of God in our physical body. It's all about being right in fellowship with God. So think about it this way. In the Great Commission, in Matthew 28 and verse 19, Jesus said, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them into the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. When a person obeys the gospel, when they're baptized into Christ for the remission of sins, they become a possession of God, of Jesus, and of the Holy Spirit. Well, they also become a possession of us in the sense that we are now in fellowship with them. We are righteous. 1 John chapter 3 and verses 8 and 9. We are right with them. Well, if we love one another, we're in fellowship with God, and His love is perfected in us. That which we have heard from, or that which we have had from the beginning, that we love one another, 2 John 5. I mean, how many times do we have to read it? And do you think that God is trying to tell us something here? How many times do we have to read it to figure out, yeah, He's trying to tell us something, all right. So here's the question. So be turning to Luke chapter 6. One thing that I said earlier was, in the very beginning, well, how do you know? Okay, so Peter talks about this unfeigned love of the brethren. It's not hypocritical. It's not a put on, not a play. So we can say it. Anybody can say it. So how do you know? And I thought of several different passages to look at, but Luke's record of the Sermon on the Mount, I think, covers a lot of ground in this realm of what it really looks like to love one another. You know, the practical day-to-day application, let's say. Luke 6, beginning in verse 27. But I say unto you, which hear, love your enemies. Do good to them which hate you. Bless them which curse you. And pray for them which despitefully use you. And unto him that smiteth thee on the one cheek, offer the other also. And him that taketh away thy cloak, forbid not to take thy coat also. Give to every man that asketh of thee. And of him that taketh away thy goods, ask them not again. As ye would have the golden, what is it, the golden rule? Is that what we're talking about here? As ye would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise? Again, I think sometimes we may be tempted by the way people treat us to forget the law of reciprocation. And the law of reciprocation is one another. As you want people to do to you, as you want to be treated, that's how you treat others. For if ye love them which love you, what benefit is that? Anybody can do that. If you're in a good relationship with those who want to have a good relationship with you, big deal. Sinners also love those that love them. And if ye do good to them which do good to you, what thank have ye? Sinners also do even the same. Big deal. All right? If ye lend to them of whom ye hope to receive, what thank have ye? For sinners also lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love ye your enemies. Okay, again, this is the day-to-day application. What does this look like to love another person? And here it is again. And do good. Those three words in Luke 6 and verse 35. One of the textbook definitions of agape is goodwill. Doing good to someone else. Do good. And lend. Hoping for nothing again, and your reward shall be great, and ye shall be the children of the highest. For He is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. And then look at verse 36. Be ye therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. Has God shown you mercy? Has God shown me mercy? Well, absolutely. You know, if it weren't for the mercy of God, we would have no hope of heaven whatsoever. But Matthew records it a bit differently here. Luke 6:36, be ye therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. If you turn over to Matthew chapter 5 and verse 48, it's interesting because Matthew writes it down like this. Be ye therefore perfect, as your Father in heaven is also perfect. And he's talking about your relationships with each other, with other people, and even your enemies. And he's not telling you there in Matthew 5:48 to be sinlessly perfect. That word perfect means complete. If you want to be a whole being, in other words, if you want to be the type of person you need to be, which Luke uses the word merciful here, then you have to act like your Father. And that's the challenge. Because so many times we want to just, how many times have we all heard people say, well, that's just the way I am and you're going to have to accept it? Well, we've not been called as Christians to just be the way that we are and for people to accept it. We're called to be like the Father. And He is merciful, and He is a whole being. And we can be merciful and whole beings just like God if we apply all these principles of the umbrella commandment. Everything we do in connection with others is covered by that one saying. Let's go back to Romans chapter 13 where we started, and then we'll close it down. Romans chapter 13. And and beginning again in verse 8. Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. And he goes through the law, what that looks like in verse 9. Look at the end of verse 9. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Love worketh no ill toward his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. Everything else we do in connection with one another falls under this umbrella. Everything. Now, it could be positive experiences, positive dealings with one another, encouragement. I think of like Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 24. Provoke one another unto love and good works by not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together. Speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, we encourage and lift one another up. And so you have the positive side, but then you also have the negative side. And we understand that when it comes to loving others and having the best interest of others in mind, there are negatives to that, aren't there? We looked at a small list. Don't bite and devour one another. Don't lie to one another. Those other things. One thing that I think of is in the book of Proverbs, it says that, how does it say it? Open rebuke is better than love carefully concealed. Sometimes there are some negatives when it comes to loving others. All right? If you're a parent or have been a parent, you get that, don't you? There are negatives sometimes in dealing with your children, but it's out of love and concern and their best interest in life. It's no different than living the Christian life. You have the positives and you have the negatives, but they're all encapsulated with love one another, love God. So, is thy heart right with God? Is that what we do? In positive ways, but also in negative ways. Are there things that we need to change? Maybe you're here this morning and your heart is not right with God because you've not obeyed the gospel yet. Remember 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 22. Seeing that ye have purified your souls by obeying the truth through the Spirit unto unfeigned love of the brethren, see that you love one another with a pure heart fervently. You go on then to verse 23. It says, having been born again, not of corruptible seed, but of incorruptible, by the word of God which lives and abides forever. Have you been born again? Well, the way we are born again, Jesus tells us in John chapter 3 and verses 3 through 5, is we have to be born by the water and the Spirit. There are multiple passages that talk about this throughout the New Testament. And you may be here this morning and you have never obeyed the Spirit. You've never been baptized in water for the remission of sins. We want to encourage you to become a Christian today. And as was said at the beginning of the service, if you have questions, any questions about what that looks like or what all is involved, we'll be more than happy to sit down and talk with you. But if you need to purify your soul in obeying the truth, we'll do whatever we can to help you. Maybe you're here this morning and you've done that in the past. But maybe your heart's not right with God because you're not loving your brethren. Or you're not loving even perhaps your enemies that we read like in Luke chapter 6 there. That's for you to know and for you to change. But if there's something here that we can help you with today in response to the gospel, either obeying it or coming back, I want you to let us know right now as we stand and sing.